Let's talk about, so I want to go over exposure triangle. We're going to talk about the settings that you guys need to be in. Yesterday at, what was that, Sand Hill National Park, or State Park, it was very a grueling, tough environment, and you guys' settings were like crazy all over the place. So it really sucks when you hike that hard through sand and stickers and heat, and then all your shots aren't usable. So let's scale back real quick. Let's talk about yesterday. It was the 4 of you when I got out there. And I can't for the life of me imagine you stuck around too much later. That was, I think it went up 17 degrees from when I showed up to when I left. And I was there not very long. Insane.
I think we walked back up, like we finished that one shot, walked up, and we were like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, it was just kind of all sorts of chaos. I found stickers all over me for like the rest of the day. It was crazy. I couldn't believe how bad that was. But let's talk about, all right, so the still finding them. Yeah, go ahead, Joey.
All of you, I would highly recommend, especially for like, up through to like September, just familiarize yourself with what like heat exhaustion looks like. I'm not even kidding.
No, yeah, like if your urine's yellow, or not at all.
Yeah. You think somebody's
Yeah.
like starting to slur their words, or they seem like they're like not doing really well. Like, remember, prioritize your own safety over a fucking shoot for class.
Yeah, so I would have, just my personal take, and I don't know what your guys' availability was because I wasn't a part of the logistical discussion on scheduling, but I would have started at like 6 a.m. out there. What time did you guys start? 8?
I got there about like 7:30.
7:30? I was outside at 7 a.m. and it was gorgeous out, and that's why I took my dogs thinking, oh man, it won't get bad till I'm on my way back. Man, that thing got crazy fast, how hot that got. So that's just me. We usually start at like 6 a.m. during the summer. And you have enough daylight also. But that's one of those time frames that I try to hit. Not a big deal if you know you're in and out in 8 a.m. Download, I have various apps that show you where the sun will be at certain times. So that usually dictates based not just on the heat and the safety, but also knowing that I have enough light at those times. And it works out really nice when the sun starts dropping fast in the evening. Okay, we got like 20 minutes. I like to go to an outdoor location the day before. If you go a month before, obviously, the Earth's rotation's on the axis is going to tilt. So if you go day before, 2 days before, you can accurately map out where the sun will be, so you know how much time you need to move from shot to shot. I don't know if your team has an AD, an assistant director, but that would be primarily their job is going, all right, I know Colton's the director on this one, right? Aiden, are you like cinematographer, or are you just all sharing it because you're all in cinematography class? There's nothing wrong with that. But those two roles need to focus on story and getting the coverage. That AD, which is why I think Carson will be great for it, has to be strong enough, confident enough, a bit of a dick to go, hey, sorry, I know you don't quite have it, but you only get one more take on it. Otherwise, you won't have your story. And if you're just trying to hit that line just with that perfect emotion, which is what your job is, or you're trying to nail that shot for the perfect camera movement or focus rack or whatever, that's what your guys' job is. But that AD's job is to make sure that we get everything, whether it's perfect or not. So if no one's the AD right now, you might allocate someone for that. Like Michael, you'd probably be a good AD. One of the post people, so like Alex, maybe you could be a good AD if you're not holding the camera as much, but also depends on who can be there. That would help you guys to just kind of stay on time. I know this isn't a directing class, but you really can't have cinematography without incorporating all those other roles and what they mean. But I do want to say I'm really happy, enthusiastic, impressed, whatever you want to say, that you guys were out basically day 3 of class, rocking and rolling in the heat. No one was complaining. I mean, it was stickers, it was hot, not windy, unfortunately. And so that's awesome. To see that you guys are already out doing it gives me a lot of hope for the rest of the semester, because I really have a lot that I want to accomplish and show you guys. And so it's going to take enthusiasm like that for us to get through everything that we could. As I've mentioned to many of you, this whole program, your whole 2 years through this could be just cinematography, and I wouldn't get to cover everything. So let's talk about how to go. Do you have anything to look at? Do you want to show anything? Have you even had a chance to look at it? I mean, it's just yesterday, so.
I looked at the couple of shots that I got on my camera. I'm pretty happy with them. We got one real nice shot that I was really proud of through like, it's just like a little bush or tree, but it perfectly, like
Yeah.
what I was talking to you and Joey about the other day, about like getting that spine shot of like,
This POV for sure.
like just like perfectly circled around like the people, but then have like the rest like nice and blurred. And I got that with like the trees, and then you can just barely see as we're crossing through. It goes right into focus for each of the people walking through, and then right back out.
So if we weren't so just thrown into this, I would like to have you, and maybe you know, and this would be great, I'd like to have you guys start taking screenshots of your settings, or when we present, have your settings baked in as like a title graphic, just something simple. And that'll be, what's your f-stop at, where was your ISO, where was your shutter speed, so on and so forth. Do you remember what your settings were? You're not going to be able to get stuff out of focus with a high f-stop, right?
Yeah.
But you were outdoors, so did you have to utilize your ND filters? Do you recall?
We were messing with the filters, but I can't remember what the settings were specifically.
That's okay.
That was after you were like, oh yeah, just turn that exposure down and use these filters instead. And I was like, oh,
Okay, yeah, so it was after I left, just there. Okay, so let's, well, go ahead, what else? What other shots did you see or think, and then we can talk about some.
With the shoulder mount, kind of like B-roll footage of just like us walking around and stuff like that. Like a couple behind the scenes stuff, but most of it was like when we were just walking around and stuff, just filming these two. We kind of thought a good idea was that limit the third person, so we have 3 people, and so we were going to limit to third person just being a POV camera. So I was just walking around with the shoulder mount while these 2 were in front of us.
Yeah, shoulder mount's a great tool for, people say handheld and they immediately assume I'm just going to grab this camera and go run around out in the field. Most handheld shots, especially really well done handheld shots, are still stabilized in some capacity. You can always add shake, you can't always take it out. So I'd much rather opt for a very stable shot and then add in some shake. So I think the shoulder mount was a great choice. I say that because it seemed like in studio and field last year, half you guys just did handheld for everything for the movement. So I need to go pan left to right. You know, typically you'd use a tripod, but people are just doing this. I'm going to tilt up and down. I get that's easy, but it's lazy, and it's not going to be as good a production quality. I'm glad that you carried a heavy shoulder rig around, and quite frankly, it's annoying to lug around and travel with, but when you're shooting, it's going to be so much better quality, and it's more accessible. So great choice there. I meant to bring you guys a monopod, but I had left it in the truck.
I had a tripod.
And you had a tripod?
We haven't used it.
Oh, a light tripod. Good. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying people can't go handheld, but that's really better if you're going to shoot really high frame rates. It's better if you're, I mean, if it's a music video that needs a lot of action or some of that sort, that's a little different. You know, skateboard videos are really common for that. But even for a riggedy, POV crazy horror film that you guys are going for, I still, especially in this particular class, because cinematography is, you know, the main purpose, use those rigs. Take advantage of them. That's why we got them. I know they don't always work great, but they will, you know, test them before you go out and make sure you have what you need. So you have tripod, you have shoulder mount, you're using some handheld, which is okay. I'm not saying you can't, but it should not be more than like 20% of your project shouldn't be, you know, and then you can use those rigs to help you out to tell your story better. I really like the top handle if I am going handheld to get low, nice shots like that. And that's something that C100 has. That's a nice tool. What else? How much did you shoot yesterday? How much coverage? Because when I got there, you were worried about more establishing shots, things like that.
Yeah, establishing, and then we had, so we did that hill shot with Gage on top, rocking on the tripod of us like kind of going on our path. I want to have that of like, what was the term? Just like a progression of time of us walking. So like faded a bit and then cut a little bit forward.
You're just gonna have little jump cuts,
yeah,
essentially. Cool. Well, and I will say that that area was a difficult terrain, but it looked, from what I could see, we were on the opposite trail, and I had my 800 lens, and when I put that into a crop factor, it kicks it up to like 1200 and some. So I I was able to get a shot of the four of you hanging out up there. I'll show you. And it was, I'm like, man, they are way the hell out there. But it looked really, I mean, if you were trying to get a very, not very city-like feel, I mean, that was a good spot for that, I think.
Yeah, we got a nice view from up there for our like big establishing shot of like, this is where we are, this is our setting.
Okay. So
It was easy too because we were able to crop out the campsite.
let's going for, oh yeah, you were trying not to see that.
Yeah.
I guess my last note on the location is, and it's your guys's, you guys know what you were visually going for. That very first trail on the other parking spot is like, and maybe you weren't looking for this visually, but it's shaded and there's less stickers and it's right off the car. That's usually where we shoot because then you go around the bend and up and then you're by that big hill. But I think it has like railroad ties kind of supporting it, and there might be like some tables and there's signage. All stuff that don't help much for setting a really moody film. So if you were picking the tougher one to be more isolated, yeah, those will pay dividends in the long run. I'm glad you guys didn't take the easy way. I kind of wished you had yesterday when I was walking, but now it's like, looking back at where you guys, because I could see Gage all the way up there, but I wouldn't know that was Gage if you hadn't told me, like you were so far away. So you guys definitely put some time in there. Wednesday, I don't want to try and do this today. I bet you're not ready for it. Let's look at some stuff Wednesday. Are you guys shooting before Wednesday?
I want to try and do either Tuesday or this evening.
Okay. So let's look at reviewing some footage Wednesday because this is due on Saturday, right?
Yep.
Is that correct?
Saturday at midnight.
And you've been in contact with Jace. I texted her and said you were getting in touch, and I was like, let me know what we need to do for payment. And she didn't. She's pretty busy. She hasn't got back to me yet. Did she mention any of that to you? Okay, I'll get that figured out. But ultimately, yeah, let's look at reviewing. Let's take Wednesday to review footage and discuss how it's looking and what kind of pickup shots you may or may not need. You may not need anything. You may be ready to rock and roll. What's your time length that you're running for here?
I mean, hitting 5-minute mark or maybe 7-minute would be cool.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you're not trying to push that 15-minute limit because that will be, do your audience a favor. So this is looking out a little bit, September 2nd. Who all's going to be able to be there? I think you have enough time that you can try and move work around and stuff. I'm going to try and be there as well. Michael and I's daughters are having their birthday up at the lake, but I believe it's Sunday.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unless some changes. So I'd like to be there, and maybe we just drive up after. But we'll get to that. We'll cross that when we get there. Let's talk about, so when Colton came up, he said things are looking a little grainy, right? Isn't that what your concern was?
See, I was worried it was like the camera monitor, because that's where we were.
And the monitors, you don't want to trust?
That's what I was saying as well.
Unfortunately, the only monitor that I would somewhat trust, no, I wouldn't trust any of them. That's why we utilize, third-party displays often. That's why we have things like waveform and stuff like that, because you don't want to fully trust. And on top of that, even if you had a great monitor, you guys are out in the sunlight with no cloud coverage or anything. So even then, you wouldn't want to fully trust it. That's why test shots the day before, 2 days before is great. Way before your actors get involved and things of that nature, have people stand in. You guys didn't have the luxury for any of this, so it's not like you should be sitting there going, dang, I wish we. But when you have the time, shoot in that location. That's why we do scouting for various purposes, not just for the look, but also for what type of power and accessibility you have. But when you came up, I want to say your shutter speed was, this is what I remember it being something like I don't remember what your f-stop was at, but your shutter speed was somewhere around like 1800, like 1/18, or no, it was way higher than that. What was it, like 3,000, 4,000? Do you remember? It was high. It was like, we'll just say it was definitely in the high numbers. So then your ISO was sitting somewhere around like 3,200. So before we get into all this, let's talk about when your shutter speed is that high, what's happening? What's happening at a 1/3000? It's going super fast, so how did you compensate that? You turned up your ISO instead of turning that down. That's where you got incredibly grainy, because that ISO is is going to get grainier as you get further away from that native ISO. You go lower, it's not going to be as grainy, but it's still not operating the camera, the battery, the media. All that talks to it way better when it's at the native ISO at 850, right? Particularly for this model of camera. This one has two native ISOs, 2500 and like 400 or 800. I'd have to double check. The red tends to stick around 800. Most cameras seem to be somewhere around 800, but that is definitely not across the board. Sony, Panasonic, they tend to not do that quite as often. Canon, Red, Blackmagic tends to have dual ISO as well. So you want to check those things. Those are really important when you're getting in your different camera systems. So once you got away from that, you had it 4 times the native roughly. That's where it was going to get super grainy. So Colton, do you know how we fixed that? Do you remember what we did?
Just we were using the shutter frames and stuff like that.
Yeah, so right now, because you guys were shooting the C100 Mark I, the C100 Mark I will do 24 frames per second and progressive, meaning if you wanted to shoot 60, you wanted to get variable frame rates, it's only interlaced and it's way lower quality. And that is because it's a little more dated camera. Most of the cameras don't do interlaced anymore. You want to be at a P. You do not want to be at I. So when you see those options, always pick P. Our computers and our internet and everything is fast enough now that we don't need interlaced. That's kind of a thing from more my era. So you want to be at 24p or 23.976p. That's your standard Hollywood frame rate. Television could be at 30. Documentaries could be at 30. Sometimes live stuff might be at 60. But if you're looking for that Hollywood look, that film-esque look, and especially when we're talking film festivals, you want to be around 23 or 24, unless you're going to shoot in 60 and then convert it back down to 24. So that way it still looks nice. Now, you had that correct. That was fine. Because when I pulled this camera up today, it was sitting at 60i. Someone must have been dabbling with it last semester. Not a big deal. But that's not what you guys want for this particular project. Shutter speed should be double the frame rate typically. Not always, but it should be double the frame rate most of the time. You cannot have your shutter speed lower than your frame rate. It's just the camera can't do that, right? So it's always going to be higher. But in photography, you might crank that. When I'm shooting nature, I'll probably shoot at least at a 1 to 500, 1 to 600, all the way up to like a 1 to like 3,000. If I'm, especially birds moving, flapping, anything flying. I really crank that up. But photography is more forgiving because you're not having, we have 24 pictures a second going here. They need to be able to talk to each other. They need to be able to make sense. So that science is a little more complicated with film. I am going to put you guys on a photography thing. Not right now. You got enough stress. But every cinematographer should be a good photographer too. It just comes as part of it. I don't know a single photographer that doesn't take still frames on a regular basis. I think it's anything, even probably a little therapeutic form. But it's for other reasons like composition and things of that nature. So you want to be at double the frame rate typically. What's some reasons you might not be at double the frame rate? Can you guys think of anything that we might have covered last year? I know it's been a few months since I've worked your brains.
It's like the camera won't match up exactly to double, but it'd be close.
Oh, yeah, so that's a good point. A lot of these photography-centric cameras, the T6i is a great example of this. Because this is a photography-first camera, not, and this wasn't even what I was thinking, but you're right, this camera does 1/50th, and then before that's like 1/35. Don't even have a 1/48 as an option because this video was an afterthought when they designed this camera. Now, you're never going to notice that that little bit from 1/48 to 1/50, but you will notice if you're at like say 1/20 and you needed to be at 1/48. It'll start getting more jittery. What's another reason where you manipulate shutter speed? I'll show you an example here in a little bit. One of them is when you have a monitor. And this monitor's refresh rate, its frequency is different than what the camera's reading, that's when you get those bars working through it, right? So if you're ever filming, and this happened to me when I would be like over an engineer's shoulder designing something on a computer, I'd have to change that flicker on my shutter speed just ever so slightly so that it matched up and didn't have the bars. When we were in a fire truck last fall, they had monitors in there, and so I wasn't able to get in the truck with Nathan, and so as he was shooting, he didn't know that, and so all they had that bar flicker all through all the monitors in the fire truck. Not a deal breaker, they still loved it and they used it, but that was one of my notes was, oh, I should show him that when I get another chance. So that's another reason. Now, in this case, you guys were way, way high for the shutter speed for this particular scenario, but shutter speed going up a little bit adds a rigidness to it, adds a little bit of, it definitely takes away that blur that kind of gives it a dreamlike feel. So if you're doing fight scene, if you're doing horror film, if you're doing Blair Witch style, a higher shutter speed's not a bad thing. I wouldn't go lower, but higher is not bad. In that same sentiment, sometimes when you're driving, if you're going along and things are coming across fast, you can turn that shutter speed up to try and catch whatever that image might be off the side of the road a little more. Sports sometimes use higher shutter speeds as well, shutter speeds as well because they like that gritty, I think football hype video is sometimes shot at a little higher shutter speed. But you do take some light out. So I like to keep it right around double. In fact, we call this shutter degree. So in that camera back there and in this camera right here, the shutter degree is at 180. So that makes it just perfectly double. So if I change the frame rate, the shutter speed's just following it, just copying it at double. I do that a lot when I shoot. And so today, I had to turn it off of that camera so that way the flicker won't come off on the monitor. And I'll show you, it's sitting at a shutter degree of 270 instead of 180. So I cranked it up. Actually, you can see on my information right here, 180 degree is my shutter speed. Very much more of a cinema motion thing. You don't see that necessarily in photography. Okay, so if our frame rate's 24, shutter speed's going to be sitting around 148. With some different scenarios, potentially, but for you guys, at least 148. You can go higher, just don't go lower. Now we need to look at the ISO, which has, as everything in our industry, everything has multiple ways that you can describe it. In this case, ISO is the main reference. You can also refer to it as the gain. ASA comes from the film world a little heavier when you're talking about film stock, but you might see it. In fact, the old Blackmagic says ASA instead of ISO, but I believe it's the only camera we have in the program that says that, which is just kind of a, once you figure it out, you'll remember. You won't remember until it happens. But ISO is what you're typically going to see. And in this case, in brackets, we can see ISO sitting at 320. But watch as I adjust this. I believe this model does it. Ugh. See how it goes in brackets? This one's actually telling you it prefers to be, I don't know, can you guys see that? Now that I look at it from here, I can't really see it that well. Let me get something. Take this out so you can see the settings a little better. Oh no, can you see that? Yeah. So it's in brackets now. Before, when I had it on anything else, it takes those brackets off. So that's one way that I kind of helped me remember, okay, it's 850 on this, because most cameras are really 800. I don't know what all science goes into that kind of engineering, except that the camera functions a little better, the image will look cleaner, the battery will run better. Supposedly all that stuff is because of that. So like I said, you're not going to see gain in ASA as much. ISO's really kind of taken over that terminology. Older cameras, if you get on a film set, it might read ASA. Now, this one has probably even more stuff, but f-stop, aperture are the two that we use a lot. But if you're looking at a cinema lens, this one refers to t-stops, not f-stops, okay? Don't be confused. It's almost the same thing. Photography is an f-stop thing, typically. T-stop is a cinema thing, always. T-stops are more accurate. An f-stop, if it says an f-stop of, let's see, we're at a 3.5, it's a little bit of an estimate. It's probably somewhere between a 3.3 and a 3.7, and it's kind of guessing. When the T-stop says that we're at a 2, it's probably right within a 2. So that T-stop tends to be a little bit more accurate. You're going to see it on a lot of our really pricey cinema lenses, but our photography-centric lenses are still going to say f-stop, okay? That is adjust accordingly. That's where you can really manipulate stuff. But when you have a scenario like Aiden's, he wanted some stuff out of focus, maybe in the foreground, maybe in the background. You're not going to be able to do that if your f-stop's too high. So that's where we kicked in the neutral density filters, the ND filters. Cranking that up and down, the higher you have 4 different stops that you can hit with those ND filters. When it's all the way up, it's as dark as it really gets. This one, ND, is cleared. You can see right now, obviously it's on the EVA1. As I turn it up at a 0.6, 1.2, and that's a 1.8 at the highest. Now you have to pretty much open that sucker up when you go high. So that's how you're able to manipulate it. If you keep this, and the thing is, it's not that these things can't be manipulated for the right reasons, but you really need, this will help centralize and focus your energy. Keep those solid, and then use f-stop and ND filters to manipulate stuff. That is what I should have done on Friday with you, instead of talking about a bunch of random cameras. I should have moved that around, but hindsight is, different. So I've shown you that. What questions do you have about the exposure triangle that doesn't make sense or seems different from last time, last year, whatever? Is there any questions about that?
What would be a purpose to have a shutter speed at 3000? If they have it there, why would they have it there?
Well, quite frankly, I mean, if you were going for a super jittery, really edgy look, that'd be the only reason outside of, you would never need that high to kick into like a certain monitor or something, like in this case. I'm almost surprised, I wish I could answer this better. I'm almost surprised it even does that, to go up that high. Joey, do you have a good reason why a film camera would go to 1/3000?
I mean,
1/300 is even high.
if it's specifically for filming, I can't imagine.
That's what I'm just kind of like.
Yeah, many circuits.
This camera, yeah, I've been to 1/8000 before just to like tinker with it, but yeah.
Because with photography, like you were talking about earlier, like to eliminate motion blur or to
Yeah.
capture multiple very rapid frames without any type of blur.
Nature and sports go high.
I mean, maybe sports, but I can't imagine you're seeing most, even I'm trying to think of a
The-
car rally. I still think
Do you,
that you're,
the only thing I could even remotely wrap my head around is you're shooting into the sun. Like you literally are about to burn up your sensor and you just can't let it see. I mean, because,
final moments, you're on a volcano.
yeah, because it's so rapid and so high, 1/3000 is really rare for me in photography, even nature-wise. You need a lot of light. And my longer lenses, are at like an f11 and f14 standard. So now that kind of also kicks into your f-stop is the one thing that is not something your camera can control to a component. This lens opens up to a 1.5 t-stop. This one opens up to a 3.5 f-stop and varies as it gets further into, as I go up, it's going to change as I have utilized the lens differently. So the one thing that you can't always control outside of just bringing in exterior lights is that the lens will dictate what your f-stop's capable of. Any other settings regarding this? And I think it's a lot, but it's really, if you got to just simplify it, and it becomes a muscle memory thing. I cover this stuff right off the bat in studio and field, but we just keep re-hitting it all the way through. And there's even times where I'm sitting there after taking roughly 1 million photos over the last 20 years, and I'm going, oh, do I want ISO or do I want F? You know, like it just something kind of ticks like, oh, I need to do this. But it should become kind of like riding a bike for you. It should become muscle memory that I just adjusted shutter speed. I need to check my f-stop, make sure it's okay. And in this case, that's why I try to simplify it so much in the cinema component. Don't even worry about these two, just lock them in, like what I do with 180 degrees, and then I'm just worried about f-stop. And then ND filters for me are kind of like, I need this certain look, and Aiden's example is perfect for that. Typically, especially documentary, if I'm just run and gun, like I was in Colombia and I couldn't control anything, then I'm just manipulating f-stop and t-stop pretty much the whole time until I get to a situation where it's like, ah, it's way too bright. Now I need to throw in an ND filter because in that case I didn't have internal NDs on that project. So that is those things are luxuries that come in like professional cameras that I'm glad you guys needed it. It's a great way to start off. When you can be in a studio setting and bring in more lights and control the situation and tell people to walk right here because there's not a cliff to fall off of and a tree in the way. It's not like it doesn't come with its own caveats, but in this case, you guys going out into the wilderness for your first project is you know, that's ambitious. You can't control it all. So in that case, your camera settings become incredibly important. I've seen people in the studio neglect these rules because they can throw another light on and they're like, I'm just gonna keep going until it looks the way I want it to. Okay, so I wanna go through the camera a little bit and give you guys just a quick rundown of this menu system. Because I think if you had seen this a little more thoroughly, then you would have had a little more confidence when you were sitting there going, I don't know why my image is so grainy. Well, hopefully this helps. So let's start with, I want to see my ND filter. Okay, so I click the ND filter on, and I can see 2 stops. I'm on 1 step there. So that way, that will help you. And do not forget, I get a call at least once a year, maybe once a semester, where they're like, it's broke. And it looks like that. Actually, let me go back. Did this happen to you guys at all yesterday? You ever seen that? Where the ND filter is simply just, I wonder if I have, where the ND filter is basically halfway through. And the first time that ever happened to me, I was like, oh, great, we broke the camera. I was just certain that something was damaged. But then, you know, you tinker with it. This is why you want to play with these things way before your actors get on set, is you don't want to be figuring out silly stuff like that. Can't control all of it, but you can prevent a bunch of it with enough preparation and practice. So that was one thing. Another thing, I always get this call. This happened this summer with one of my interns shooting a project, is he left the SD card door open, which you can't see great. My f-stop's so low here that I have to rack focus. So that SD card slot is open. One way you can tell is it will, I need just like a little more range. One thing you can tell is right here, both SD cards are crossed out. When I close it, give it a second to load, now it recognizes it. But what happens, I mean, I swear, I've done this. Everybody that I know shot with C100. Have you ever done this, Joey? You feel like things broke and you're about to go back to the studio and, you know, throw the camera against the parking lot. Because when I start clicking things, when I push record, it says invalid operation. It doesn't tell you why. So that's where trial and error starts to kick in. That's the SD card slot, is the culprit there. Nothing too crazy. Now, they're a little different on the Mark II and the Mark I. We're on the Mark I right now. We'll just stay with this. But it's similar. I push this thumb toggle up here, and now it's highlighted a couple of things for me. The first being the color. Did you guys match color between your 2 cameras?
That we did.
Okay, cool. I don't want to say that I'm surprised. I guess I wouldn't have been surprised if that was something that, like, slipped your mind. But super easy to adjust color. Make sure you're matching this. Do Alex and Caitlin a favor. Yes, you can this is a whole other world. When I started, you used to have stupid little cardstock everywhere you went, and you had to white balance every scene no matter what, because NLEs, nonlinear editors, did not have white balance options when I started. So if you didn't white balance that in the camera, then you had shots that would be yellow and then blue and then, somewhere in between. And essentially just that right there would slow your progress. It would slow your prep time. You'd have to add more prep time because of that, because each scene had to be white balanced. Every time you moved the camera, turned it off in some cases, you had to white balance it. Now you can push a little eyedropper tool and post and tinker and but still a really good practice if you have multiple cameras, always be white balancing. Now, when we start shooting RAW, neither of these cameras do, when we shoot RAW and some of these others, you can manipulate white balance and even ISO in post, which is pretty cool. Because when Joey and I first got into this, you could only do that kind of stuff with RAW photography, RAW still photos. Okay, so the white balance, first thing, which is a Kelvin. That K is for Kelvin, that doesn't, some say WB for white balance. Then we're on our ISO, nothing crazy there. I'm not saying that there isn't situations where you can't crank a little bit, but you will absolutely get grainier and grainier as you get up, without a doubt. And I think you guys are sitting at 3200. The Blackmagic 4K, Brandon's in athletics, it has a native ISO at 3200, and it looks amazing. But we don't have that for this particular camera. So you got to know your equipment. And then your shutter speed. And this was where your guys's was super high, because it was, well, your ISO was probably matching this. Somehow, one of them got off. I can't really see it very well. You're good. I just can't see it well at all. Oh, I'm at 124. It won't let me go lower. It's sitting around 160, 148. Now, I was having some issues earlier before you guys got here, and I was setting this up. It wouldn't go below 160. Why do you think that was? Because I kind of mentioned it earlier.
Is that the frame rate?
Yeah, because the camera was sitting at 60i as the frame rate, and I forgot these cameras even did 60i, because I usually shoot with the Mark II. So yeah, that was the reason. Good. Now, weirdly enough, well, I guess not weirdly enough, I actually kind of like it for the way I set it up, and maybe it'll help you remember. Your finger on the dial, your index, is what is adjusting the f-stop. My minimum being a 3.5, max being a 22. This is all because of the lens capabilities. But the nice thing that it kind of helps you think about this when you're shooting, if you're going to push this button, you're going to adjust something that you shouldn't when you're running gun. Keep that ISO at 850 as much as you can. Keep that shutter speed at 148. Don't adjust your Kelvin or your white balance unless it's something in the story that requires it. So if you're going to make any adjustments, you're doing it with your finger on your index finger, or you're doing it with your other index finger with the neutral density filter. I think this is probably the best way to simplify this complex system for you. Let me get it back in focus here. And I'm going to show you just a couple quick things. In the menu, there, it looks a little better. In the menu, because the menu in this is my second least favorite, by far that one. I hate that menu. I would love to talk to the people who designed that camera, because the rest of it's incredible. So some of the things you might need. Get my focus just right. It's just not great. Initialize media. What does that mean?
You're formatting the SD card or whatever.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Initializing media. For some reason, Canon says format card on every other thing I use, seems like. I mean, I don't use a whole lot of C200s and 400s or 500s and things like that. But initializing media will do just that. It will format the card, which means you should do this before every project with your card, because that card could have been in a Panasonic before. And that card will get a better functionality when it knows what system it's in. Also, it clears all the media off the card. This can't be undone, and typically that's okay. So initializing media inside the wrench, super, that's one of the other phone calls I get a lot. Yeah?
I think I did it, like, purge my SD card
Some cameras will not function if it thinks, okay, this was just in a lav, now it's in a GoPro. They don't, those different, because GoPro doesn't make lavs, so it doesn't work that way. You don't, even if it's, even if you're going from a Canon C100 to a Canon T6i, that's still a whole different software, probably a whole different team. Might have even been designed in a different country. Still give it that, that initialized media or that format. And this is also very important in the capacity of media management, keeping your cards clean. You don't want to be like me and have 3 projects sitting on one card. That's a terrible thing to do. You'll lose something. The only time I did that was when we shot 3 short films in 3 days. And so we literally didn't have time to dump cards in between. Things kept popping up and we just kept going and doing these interviews. We didn't lose anything, but I was sitting at risk the entire time. My old job, I did photography and film. They had me do 6 projects in one day. I lost one of the shoots, and I was livid because that's the only time I've ever lost anything that I can recall. That was like an assignment. That was a project that came from people paying me. And I basically told them, I was like, don't ever put me in that situation again. Like, I didn't even apologize because I was constantly running from the next thing to the next thing. They're like, oh, this person's here from Utah. Go get a picture of them in front of this thing we just sold. Oh, we got to get this rig shot because we need to get this video out. Oh, and we got to get this magazine thing finished up. By the end of the day, I had lost one of the 6 projects, probably formatted a card that was full that I thought I dumped. I couldn't even tell you because it was running around like crazy. So basically, they set me up for failure, but I set myself up for failure by not setting those expectations that, hey, I can't meet this all the time, because I kept doing it. I kept allowing that kind of stuff to happen at work. And eventually, that was going to be something that I couldn't keep up with, and it did happen once. And so we just lost some photography session from people who weren't even from the region, and we weren't going to get that back. And quite frankly, I didn't really care about the project as much as just my reputation to get things accomplished. So media management is always going to be important. The other thing I want to look at here is you have some really cool stuff, like some really advanced things. Pre-record. Joey, you ever use pre-record? I don't know. Pre-record's really popular if you're documentarian, nature especially. Essentially, the camera, once you click record, it'll grab information from before you even saw something. So if you had this crazy event happen in front of you, but you weren't recording it, as long as you don't wait more than a few seconds and you hit it after, it will tend to catch that. But uses a lot of battery, uses information. So, it's a cool feature, especially if you're doing like a sports hype video and you're like, oh crap, I missed that. Push pre-record. As long as you were in focus and in frame, you should be okay. Now, frame rate, these 2 things here, bit rate and frame rate, become really important when we're talking about these cameras because they have different areas. Bit rate, God, you can't see it that great. Okay. 24 megabytes per second down to 7. You need to be at 24. Now on the Mark II, you have upwards of like 60 megabytes per second. That's why it's able to do more 1080p 60 opposed to 1080 24. Dang, run out of time. So I need to be at 24 so I can get the highest quality. I won't be able to get progressive out of this camera without the right bit rate. So if you're going, why won't it turn on? You might be at the wrong bit rate. So highest bit rate tends to get you the best image. So I'm going to select that, and then when I go into frame rate, this is where I have these 4 options. Let me go back real quick. Now if I go down to, we'll just click 17 and see. No, that one still does it. I don't know what you would use. 7 I mean, you're saving a ton of space, but you want the higher quality for when you're doing all your color and everything. So frame rate's really important. Not as much in this camera as it is the Mark II, because the Mark II is where you're going to want to do like 1080 60 and then maybe 1080 24. Documentaries, every time we do a documentary, we'd be interviewing in 24, and then they do like a demo when we did our art series. So then if they go paint or start messing with clay, I would want to do that in 60 so I could slow it down later. Those are the big things. Knowing how to initialize media, stuff like that. It's worth playing with, getting in and trying to see what all you have in here. in this case, this camera has, so if you want to shoot C-Log, are you guys shooting C-Log? Do you know? And the issue will be mainly if one of you is shooting C-Log and the other one isn't. Do you have the cameras here?
I didn't bring mine.
We want to double check that. So when I see CP Cinema locked right here inside the camera, right? That is turning on and off C-Log. Why doesn't it say just C-Log? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Log format, so you have a lot more color space. I like to leave that on. Now, let me show you real quick what it looks like off. So you can see that image. Not great, but look at the blue. I try to remember that for a second. Go back to C-Log. Can you tell any difference? Not the best example. It's going to be a lot flatter. It's not going to have nearly the saturation. Do you know why that is? Essentially, it's grabbing more information because you're going to add color in post. You're not going to have a finished image. You're going to have an image that will need some S-curves and contrast, maybe a little exposure adjustment. You can add saturation. But that flat image gives you more room to work with color later.
So like when we're trying to do more of a bluer tone on our image for this, would it be better to shoot in that?
It's just better to shoot C-Log anyways, and always plan on doing a little color correction. I'm not a colorist. I can do my own color if it's simple. I hire it out if we're shooting on like film, like 35 millimeter or something. I don't want to put all that time and energy and money into it and then have my color skills. But you can easily take C-Log, correct it with your waveforms and stuff, and get it to be pretty accurate. Those are so check to see that. It's let me not butcher this. CP Cinema Lock in that camera. Just make sure it's on both. Now, you can see that it's on. I should point this out. You don't even need to go in there. If it says CP Lock right here, then you have C-Log on. I think I checked yours. I don't recall checking both. Typically, it's always on. So whoever had this camera last was shooting in interlaced and without that, so there clearly wasn't me using it, because those are two things that I wouldn't have off or on. And not saying that's wrong, not saying whoever used it was doing the wrong thing, but not from what I shoot, I can tell you that much. And there may have just been someone messing with it. The other thing is, you want to make sure that you're getting audio files or audio reference here. Save, you don't have a lot of dialogue, right?
That's what we were trying to figure out. If we want to, if it's at all possible to like overlay it afterward, if we just keep more of like our faces off screen, or if we try to write a dialogue. We tried talking and like improvising a bit yesterday as like a practice, and it was,
Sure. We'll have to talk about that more. So the reason we don't have any option for audio on this one is because we don't have the top handle. The Mark I will not do audio without the top handle. The Mark II will. And if you're just getting reference audio, the in-camera audio is fine for reference. You don't want to rely on it for your project to sound good. What am I forgetting, Joey? What's something that you would want to cover if you were taking this out for the first time, second time? How to take the lens off? Yeah. If that's the case, you better just leave it on. I mean, they're complex, but if you break it down and simplify it, don't be intimidated by all that other junk in there. You don't need to worry about all this stuff right now. These cameras are capable of a lot more than, because we do a lot of live events with them, we do other things. But as far as a cinema camera goes, God, these things. I mean, I got a video that I just watched last week before we did that thing. I should put it in the assignment just to show you. Someone reviewed a 10-year-old, the very first model, and he was like, I would buy this camera today. It's still that solid of a camera. They really did a great job with this one. Unfortunately, the way our capitalism works in our country and the world is you come out with a new model every year or you go out of business, basically. So GoPro's a good example. They'll pump out a new model whether they got something new to add to it or not. And you see it a lot. That's why there's like the T7i all the way up before they discontinued that thing. The T6i was great. The T4i was trash. They needed to upgrade that one, but they probably could have stuck with a T5i for a really, really long time. My T3i works amazing. Still works amazing. So there's just sometimes you don't need to keep upgrading stuff. Canon really did a good job here. When you can operate this camera, you can easily move into these other systems and models and do pretty well. Okay, we're out of time if you need to go. If you're not in any rush, I'd like to show you this shutter speed thing real quick because it'll be easier to see. If you want to come back here. Okay. Let me get my head right here. All right. So totally different camera, but shutter speed is what I had to. It was really the only thing I had to adjust outside of f-stop. So if I go to the shutter I like, which would be 180 degrees. All right, so now we're getting it a little bit. So go ahead and take a look at the monitor at the bottom left there. You see that flicker? That's really distracting if you're doing like a marketing promotional video and all the computers are flickering, all the monitors are flickering. Something we tend to do in those cases, like we shot at a financial advising firm, so very office-y, wanted it to be clean. Huge monitors around where they use for different information that they would pass, a lot of graphs. We actually, instead of trying to zero in on all of them right away, first thing we did was we pulled a green screen graphic and we put those on all the monitors. Then we could add our own charts and graphs to it later. But we still didn't want that flicker, so you can see it just ever so slightly. Let me see if I can get it to be worse. Now, what I had to do to get rid of that is I just kept, there's no perfect math here because I couldn't tell you what the frequency is in the monitor right now without looking. So in that case, instead of digging in to see what their frequency's at, I kicked it up. And when I got to, I was seeing it here at 180, just ever so slightly, if you take a look. I wonder if it would be easier to see if I open. So you can see it flickering. And then when I went up just a couple clicks to 270, now it's gone. It's probably slower, adding a little more motion blur, but now I have a clean image coming out of my monitors. And if you're doing a promotional, if you're doing anything and you have that flicker in the background, it's super distracting.